Kentucky absorbs all my thoughts, all my plans, and all my affections. And this poor Kentucky, in possessing all that, still possesses very little.
Thus spoke Benedict Joseph Flaget, the first bishop of Bardstown, Kentucky, in a manner characteristic of his zeal and humility. Born in France, 1763, and ordained a Sulpician priest at the age of 23, the young Flaget had offered his services to Bishop John Carroll of Baltimore when he was forced to flee the French Revolution. Arriving in the United States in 1790, he served first at Poste Vincennes, but after 3 years he was appointed to teach at Georgetown College and later in St. Mary's Seminary, Baltimore. Then in 1808, 20 years after Baltimore had been erected a diocese with John Carroll as its first bishop, Rome declared Baltimore an archdiocese with 4 suffragan sees: New York, Boston, Philadelphia, and Bardstown. The 45-year-old seminary professor, Father Flaget, was designated the first bishop of Bardstown. The nomination of Flaget for the Diocese of Bardstown had been made at the request of Father Stephen T. Bardin, the Apostle of Kentucky. In recommending Flaget to Rome for this post, Bishop Carroll said of him,
"For several years he was stationed at a place called Poste Vincennes, where with the greatest industry and the most hearty goodwill of all, he labored in promoting piety. He is at least 40 years of age, and of tender piety towards God, of most bland manners, and if not profoundly, at least sufficiently imbued with theological knowledge."
When the news reached St. Mary's Seminary that on April 8, 1808, Pope Pius VII had raised Father Flaget to the episcopacy, no one was surprised except the humble Sulpician, who was shocked. Flaget felt totally unfit to be a bishop. In great anguish, he wrote to the now Archbishop Carroll,
Though I was told that in a few days I would receive a favorable answer, I can't help entertaining some doubts about the satisfaction it will afford me. To be plain with you, I am afraid that you wait only for some answers from the different parts where formerly I exercised my ministry, which according to all probability, being full of compliments, you will then urge them against me as new proof that I must accept, and will pay very little attention to all my arguments to refuse. My resolution would still remain the same, because the motives of my refusal should not be altered in the least. I beg of you with tears in my eyes to let me forever enjoy unmolested the humble post I occupy. I will prove more useful in remaining in the college than in going to Kentucky as a bishop.
Archbishop Carroll was unmoved by the ardent pleas of the Frenchman. When a delegation of Sulpicians from St. Mary's came to argue with Carroll in favor of Flaget's cause and told the archbishop that they had received an answer in a novena, the patient prelate exploded in wrath.
"What, gentlemen, you have prayed? Think you then that before proposing your brother I did not pray, and that the cardinals who surrounded the Holy Father and the sovereign pontiff himself did not pray? Well, I tell you plainly that Father Flaget must accept."
In order to escape the burden, Flaget finally went to France to present his case to his Sulpician superior, but he was told that orders had been received from the Pope that he must accept. Resigned, Flaget returned to America with 6 seminarians, including 2 destined to the episcopacy, Guy Chebras and Simon Broutet. Sometime after he had reached his diocese, Bishop Flaget wrote back to his brother in France.
I was compelled to accept the appointment. I had not a cent at my disposal. The Pope and the cardinals, who were dispersed by the revolution, were not able to make me the slightest present. Archbishop Carroll was still poorer than myself, for he had debts. I owed nothing. My consecration took place in Baltimore on the feast of Saint Charles Borromeo, November 4th, 1810. For want of money to defray the expenses of the journey, I could not undertake it. It was only 6 months afterwards, through a subscription made by my friends in Baltimore, that I was enabled to reach Bardstown. When we came to Louisville, the faithful dispatched for my use a fine equipage drawn by 2 horses. Horses were furnished to all those who accompanied me, and our wagons transported our baggage. The roads were so detestable that in spite of my beautiful chargers, I was obliged to perform part of the journey on foot. In entering the town, I devoted myself to all the guardian angels who reside therein, and I prayed to God to make me die 1,000 times, should I not become an instrument of his glory in this new diocese. Without money, without a house, without property, almost without any acquaintance, I found myself in the midst of a diocese 2 or 3 times larger than all France, and myself speaking the language too very imperfectly. Add to all this that almost all the Catholics were emigrants, newly settled.
His see was the entire Northwest, the area between the Great Lakes and the Ohio River, from the Alleghenies to the Mississippi River. It consisted of Kentucky, Tennessee, and Ohio, as well as the territories from which were created the states of Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin, Iowa, Minnesota, Missouri, and half of Arkansas. From his original jurisdiction, some 35 dioceses were to emerge. During his first year in Kentucky, the bishop and his companions resided in 2 cabins erected for them on Father Bardstown's plantation. On December 21st, 1811, Flaget ordained Guy Chebras, who was therefore the first priest to be ordained in Kentucky and the West. The bishop held 3 synods, several retreats, and made many trips over Kentucky to visit the various stations. He records in his journal that during the first 4 months of 1812, he rode 800 miles on horseback on missionary duty. Despite the declaration of war against Great Britain in September 1812, Flaget and Father Stephen T. Bardstown began the long journey on horseback to attend a council called by Archbishop Carroll. Although the Archbishop had to cancel the council, as Bishop Chevreuse did not want to leave Boston, the trip had been not only an experience and adventure to Flaget, but also a revelation. The growth of the Catholic population in Ohio, he had noted. Some of the weak points in Kentucky he had observed at first hand. He was now in the midst of the beginning of Catholicism in the West, and he pointed with a thoughtful finger to the crying need of the time. His entries in his journal show this concern.
They had the wisdom in Ohio not to allow slavery. Just now, hired help is costly, but with the present increase of the population, this inconvenience will not last long. It is almost impossible to form an idea of the Catholics who forget their religion on account of the lack of priests, or the lack of zeal in the priests who have charge of some congregations. Not a day passes that we do not find great numbers of these strayed sheep, who, because they do not see their real shepherd, become Baptists, Methodists, etc., or at least nothingists. To remedy this great evil, it would be necessary that a priest, filled with the Spirit of God and convinced of the value of souls, should often get away from his accustomed route and, going into the country, ask if there are not Catholics in those regions. The discovery of a single one will lead to the discovery of 10 others. Let him show a great desire for the salvation of souls and a contempt for their money. With such dispositions, a priest would have the consolation of bringing to the bosom of the church those who will never enter it unless we